I've been painting trees more lately, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is they're very interesting to paint because they are full of so many different kinds of line quality. Branching, you get every kind of line that you can possibly imagine in trees. But probably the main reason is I've always felt that in landscape painting in particular, that it really falls, there are really three archetypal forms of landscaping that cater to specific psychological states for people. You have vistas, broad, wide open spaces where you have a clear view out to the horizon line. You have distant objects which give a sense of scale to it, vastness of scale, and it's those types of settings that you contrast your own sense of yourself with. It calls your own identity into question. You see just exactly how small you are in relation to what's outside of you, how small what's immediately outside of you, the landscape itself is, in terms of everything that is outside of that landscape. I tend to really be attracted to places where you have a pronounced feeling of, that you're sitting on the surface of a planet. The planet is rotating. There's stuff going on off the planet. Those kinds of feelings, to me, are really powerful. And I think in a lot of ways, deeply American. It's a very American experience that's unique to this country for a lot of reasons. Because of the history of the expansion of the country, and because it's such a common experience for everybody to have made long journeys in a car. You get in a car and you drive and you drive and you drive, and there's, in particular, the journey from my house here in St. Louis out to Denver to visit my relatives. I've made that trip probably 150, 200 times easily over the years, and it unfolds to you so slowly when you do it that way. You have, here in Missouri, it's kind of hilly, open meadow, woodland kind of landscape, and as soon as you get out past Kansas City, it starts to change into what I consider to be true prairie. It becomes lower, more rolling, fewer trees, and much more of a sense of the sky and the weather. And then when you get way out into Kansas, it's just, once you get past the line in Kansas, it gets flat, very uniform. There's almost a sense of blankness out there. And you drive, and it really doesn't change much at all until you get all the way out across eastern Colorado. Eventually you start to see the Rockies in the far distance, and then it's a complete transformation. It becomes much more insular feeling. You have a sense of enclosure once you get out into that mountain landscape. Now, in Colorado, there are a lot of open areas in the mountains, and I tend to be attracted to those to paint because you still get that sense of horizon out there. The size and scale of the mountains really give you a feeling of, sitting on the planet, the vastness of it, and yet, at the same time, the smallness of it, as a planet, vast to you personally, but tiny in comparison to everything else. The second type would be what I call glades, and those are landscape situations where you have physical objects in the setting that relate to human scale. The most common form of that is the tree. You have a trunk because trees have a trunk, and they are immediately relatable as you see commonality in it. You see your similarities to nature and the landscape, and that's the overall psychological state very beautiful tree. The contrast of its really light trunks that have that real pure linearity to them. And yet, as far as the commonality thing goes, they're part of, whenever you see a grove of aspen, they're always part of the same organism. They grow from interconnected root systems. They're essentially outgrowths from the same roots and like a family. Mainly, it's just that I think that they're really beautiful, and it has that kind of more interior, introspective feel to it. There are certain times of day that I find very, very difficult to paint. It's hard to locate something that sticks with me. That period between, I'd say, about 11 o'clock in the morning until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, where the light is more distinctly overhead, especially in the summer. The shadows are less long, and there is more of a sense of uniformity in the way the landscape looks. Also, the color, depending upon the atmospheric conditions, can be a little on the bleached out side. To me, it's just less interesting. So I tend to be attracted to times of day where things are in flux, where the beginning and the ending, and where things are in a state of high transition, where things are changing. It's those kinds of situations that I tend to be attracted to. There's nothing new in that. Leonardo da Vinci wrote about that hundreds of years ago. If you're going to include landscape in a painting, look for those moments of high transition, because they have more of a tendency to stick with you. They become more memorable, because of the fleeting nature of what they look like, because they're less normal. They tend to cement themselves in your head. And as far as the clouds go, my favorite thing to paint probably are really large cumulus clouds that have a kind of an architectural feeling, where you get a sense of volume in the clouds. Those are probably my very favorite thing to paint. But I make a concerted effort not to be attracted just to one particular thing. I find cloud cover and weather to be endlessly interesting. I can get just as interested in painting, what might seem much more ordinary to someone else, if the arrangement is interesting, if it relates to what's happening in the landforms, and if the color is interesting. I tend to be attracted to, that more transitional kind of color. I like longer shadows. One of the hardest things for me to paint, and really a challenge that I almost never do it, is when you're out and it's just, blazing blue sky. It can be interesting to paint that because there's such a sense of subtlety in it, in the color gradation. And to get, what appears to be a relatively uniform color, to have a sense of atmosphere and volume, that can be very challenging, from a pure painting point of view. I tend to be less interested in it. It's just not something that I do on a regular basis, but I do it. The way that I work is, generally I'll go out. I usually do at least a couple driving trips a year. Those are generally out west. These days I fly into Denver because my brother lives out there, and then I'll rent a car. Most of the time I make some sort of a plan of the basic idea of where I'm going to go. The last few years I've concentrated more on Colorado than anything else. My brother has a friend that has a house up in the mountains southwest of Denver, kind of generally find someplace centralized, I'll just go up there and hang out. What I usually do, I'll get up in the morning and drive around, just looking for things that look interesting. I'll stop, usually I'll have a sketch pad and my camera, and I just stop it. I'll shoot a ton. If I see something that's interesting, I just shoot a ton of photographs, and not just of things that I think I'll be painting, but the area around it. I want to create a record of the feeling of the place. And if I find something that's particularly good, I may sit down and make a couple sketches of compositional ideas. In that morning time, if I'm not getting anything that's interesting to me as regards the light or the sky, then I'm taking mental notes of where good views are. And I just try to cover as much ground as I can. I drive all over the place. And I'll continue to do that into the day. I just drive around and kind of scope things out, things that I think might be interesting as far as views go. And then in the evening, that's my big time, probably from 4 o'clock until the sun goes down. And in that time, I'll be going back to all those places that I've found and hoping for good light and sky conditions. And I get kind of frantic at those times. It's a constant calculus of, where the sky is interesting, what's moving towards it, what the weather is like, what the light is like, what the light may be like, in another hour or two. So that when I get to that final 45 minutes to hour of light, I like to find one spot that has ideally more, maybe at least 2, sometimes 3 different views in it. And I just stick in that spot and shoot photographs. The light changes so fast